Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Congresswoman Gay Scanlon. Congresswoman, I appreciate you coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
The House Judiciary Committee held a field hearing in New York City on Monday about the victims of violent crimes in Manhattan. Before you arrived at the hearing, you categorized it as a, quote, piece of performative nonsense and a cheap political stunt. Now that you participated in the hearing, do you still feel that way, and how do you feel today?
I think that's accurate. I mean, it was billed as being, it was supposed to be a hearing about victims of crime in Manhattan. Um, there was no reason to choose Manhattan. There was no reason to drag the Judiciary Committee and all the expense of transporting all the committee members up there and the staff up there, particularly when Manhattan, of all places, is actually seeing a decreasing crime rate. So it was pretty clear from the outset that what was driving this hearing was the chairman's interest in trying to discredit the Manhattan district attorney, who just the week or so before had indicted and arrested the former president. And of course, Chairman Jordan is one of the former president's biggest allies.
I do want to read you a description of what the committee said that the hearing was about. This was on its website. The hearing, Victims of Violent Crime in Manhattan, will examine how Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg's pro-crime, anti-victim policies have led to an increase in violent crime and a dangerous community for New York City residents. When you were first alerted about this field hearing, what were you told?
Our first alert to it, I believe, was a tweet or some kind of social media notice, which came pretty late during our district week.
And what was the goal that was relayed to you once you asked questions about it?
Pretty much just what you said there. I mean, we didn't get a lot of information. We got whatever the committee had posted on the website or social media. We were basically learning about the hearing in the same time frame that the public did, because the chairman wasn't sharing a lot of information with the Democratic members of the committee. If there had been genuine engagement and discussion of what we should be trying to do, we probably would have asked, as we did in the hearing, that we focus on best practices for reducing crime, that we focus on what our constituents are most concerned about, which is reducing gun violence.
Obviously, there were witnesses there that were either themselves or had members
Oh, yeah.
of their family that were victims of violent crime. You sat there, you listened to their stories. What do you think about them and their stories yesterday?
Well, as I said in the hearing, I mean, I felt badly that they had been used, in effect, by the majority members of the committee to drive this hearing. Clearly, these are people who have suffered from various forms of violence and crimes in their lives, and your heart couldn't help but go out to them. And I admire their courage for speaking up and trying to change things, to try to turn that pain into action and to actual change for their communities. But as I said in the hearing, I'm sorry that that hearing is not what's going to do it. We are not going to see legislative work come out of that hearing. The majority clearly had no interest in digging into what works or doesn't work. They came with a set of talking points and tried to exploit the situation and exploit these people's pain and grief in order to take some hits at the district attorney, who had actually had the temerity to try to hold Mr. Trump accountable for some, what the grand jury has said are criminal violations.
Obviously, Republicans and Democrats had very different characterizations of this hearing. Ranking member Jerry Nadler called it a weaponization of the House Judiciary Committee. And Chairman Jim Jordan said that, quote, here in Manhattan, the scales of justice are weighed down by politics, and that the DA is, quote, looking for opportunities to advance a political agenda. What is your reaction to his assessment?
Well, I think his statement there really points out exactly what we were talking about. He went into that hearing saying that the district attorney for Manhattan had a purely political agenda. which I think if you look at the statistics and what the district attorney there has done is not true. They've actually seen big reductions in a variety of types of crime in Manhattan during his tenure. So it seems pretty obvious, even from Mr. Jordan's statement, opening statement, that he went in there trying to score some political points.
Representative Jim Jordan isn't the only one to call DA Bragg's policies soft on crime. Back in 2022, he announced his office wouldn't prosecute certain low-level crimes, and he's been an advocate for controversial bail reform. What do you think of the criticism that he has been widely panned for soft on crime?
I really have not followed that closely. I understand that those are talking points that the Republican Party has used. But obviously, Mr. Bragg was elected, so clearly his constituents disagree.
And you said that the hearing was grandstanding and a stunt and, quote, preventing us from being able to do the real work that the people who elected us expected us to do in Congress. So what would that be? What is that real work that you would rather be doing than sitting at this hearing that you're characterizing as a political stunt?
Look, it's one thing to have a hearing to highlight an issue with the intent to move forward some solutions. We're not seeing any solutions come out of here. And actually, it seemed to be a hearing looking in search of a problem, to the extent that the claim was that Manhattan was some kind of hotbed of criminal activity. Actually, as multiple people pointed out, the chairman's own district has more crime per capita than Manhattan does. So, there's so many things we could be working on. Our constituents, people across the country, are crying out for us to address the gun violence and the flood of guns to our streets, which are resulting in a mass shooting nearly every day. So 96% of the American public would like to see us have background checks that actually prevent violent people from getting their hands on weapons. We could be passing that law. We see a strong majority of the American public wanting to reinstate the assault weapons ban. We could be acting on that. Instead, waste time and energy and taxpayer dollars in transporting the entire Judiciary Committee and staff to Manhattan, rather than bringing a couple witnesses to DC, with no legislation that is going to come out of this. There was nothing in that. And in fact, to your point that you raised earlier, there was no congressional jurisdiction here. What he was complaining of, state level bail reduction laws, the actions of a locally elected district attorney, these are not things that Congress has any jurisdiction over. So it was an abuse of congressional power. That the only rational explanation for why we were there was because the chairman and the former president's allies wanted to take a whack at the district attorney in Manhattan.
Democrats have widely called this hearing a political stunt.
So have independents.
And Republicans have said that the indictment of former President Donald Trump has also been a political stunt. And according to a CNN SSRS poll that was taken after news broke of Trump's indictment, 60% of adults agree with the decision to bring charges against the former president. But 76% of the Americans polled believe politics did play somewhat of a role in that decision. Do you agree with the majority there?
I think the important point here is that a New York State grand jury, when presented with evidence, decided that charges should be brought against the former president. So everything else in this, talking universe and social media is based upon incomplete information. We don't know exactly what the grand jury considered when they reached its decision. We will probably learn that as the case moves forward, with all the legal protections that we have in our judicial system. So if this was based on purely political considerations, if this was not based on facts and law, then that will come out in the course of the trial process.
Sure. And before the hearing yesterday, Representative Jim Jordan was on Fox and Friends, and he said that he planned.
I'm shocked.
And he said that he did, in fact, plan to go to other cities around the country holding these types of field hearings. Is that something that you would participate in? Do you think those field hearings would bring any legislation, or do you think that is also a stunt as well?
Well, I think if we get a little bit of clarity about what he hopes to accomplish in those hearings, then maybe we can see that there is some kind of legislative agenda. But certainly, Mr. Jordan and in fact the Republican Party, the House Republican majority, have not put forward any anti-crime legislation thus far. So again, it becomes a mystery what is hoped to be accomplished here when you're picking a city that has actually made inroads in crime prevention, but your focus there is about what crime might have occurred in past years or in other boroughs.
Throughout the hearing yesterday, and even in our conversation now, gun violence was brought up. Do you think
Yes,
that's
by the Democrats.
of course, or do you think that's the most important issue facing the country today?
If we're talking about crime and things under the Judiciary Committee's jurisdiction, I think that's what most Americans think is the most important issue facing the country today.
Will your committee be addressing that anytime soon?
If the Democrats were in charge of the committee, I believe it would. We know we have a hearing tomorrow in which Mr. Jordan and his Republican colleagues are trying to make it easier for people to purchase weapons that can be used to commit mass killings. So I think we're headed in very different directions.
What do you think working with Republicans then would look like? Because you're saying there's an impasse, you're heading in different directions, but obviously Congress does need to work together to solve this issue. The majority of Americans want to see that. So what today can you pledge to work? Where can you find common ground with Republicans?
I find a lot of common ground with Republicans in my home district and in the Senate and in other places, even with some of our colleagues in the House. But unfortunately, House leadership right now is really being driven by a far right minority. And that's a group that is not willing to compromise, is not willing to work together. And on the issue of guns is pretty much driven by a very extremist view of the Second Amendment.
Congresswoman, I really appreciate you coming on today and speaking with me about this.
Thank you.